Good morning. This is retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran Church, a little Lutheran church in Amherst, New York, a suburb of Buffalo. We welcome you to our broadcast this morning. It is the February 6th of 2022. We are still in the pandemic and with staggering losses of life in the United States. And millions upon millions have been sick. It hasn't been a great time. We're into the beginning, the third year of this pandemic. It started in 2019. That's why they call it COVID-19. Anyways, that's kind of the harsh side of life. But today happens to be Transfiguration Sunday. We're in that part of Epiphany that culminates with Transfiguration Sunday, the account of Jesus and his disciples going up on the mountain, and he is changed before them. He appears differently. And that's the subject today that we're looking at. The gospel text appointed for this Transfiguration Sunday is Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. That's Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 to 9. And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, one for Elias. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud, excuse me, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. When the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, and be not afraid. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. Here ends that portion of the gospel text from the Gospel of Matthew, the 17th chapter, verses 1 through 9, appointed to be read on this Transfiguration Sunday. Now, it would seem to a lot of people today, possibly, that this would be quite a way to promote Jesus. If they could have him shine like that in public places, in Jerusalem and other places around Israel, you would think that the people would follow him, and if that's what Jesus wanted, that's what the Father wanted, then that would be apparently quite simple to do. However, that's not Jesus' purpose. That's not the Father's intent in sending Jesus, that crowds would follow him, to be popular. That's not the idea at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The Father sent his Son to us not to be popular, but instead to be crucified. This is the Father's design before the worlds were begun, that his Son would be born here, true God and true man, born of Mary, and born and begotten of the Father, and that this Son of God would live, morning voice, and would live among us for the purpose of overcoming sin, whatever that might be. Now, I say that, and people would say, well, sin is the most obvious thing. Is it? Is it really? Sin is an offense against God the Father. Have you met him recently? Have you accidentally kicked him in the shins? Huh? Have you spilled coffee on him? No, of course not. We don't know him. We've never seen him. And yet, somehow, in some way, our lives are a living offense to him. He takes it personally, which to me is amazing. This couple 100 pounds of flesh that lives for such a short time and then returns to the dirt. And this being, this Heavenly Father, not only takes notice, but is offended. Inconceivable, beyond imagination. So the lists of sins are actually quite trite. That's like going to your doctor and saying, Doctor, I have this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. And he says, no, those are symptoms. What's really wrong with you is you're dying. You see, sin is just symptoms of the actual malady. The actual malady is beyond our imagination. We're not dying in the sense of physically dying, although all of us, in a sense, are. But the reality here is much more heinous, much more insidious. That somehow we have become a living offense to this being we refer to as God. You see, that is a situation that Jesus was sent to remedy. And the entirety of it is outside of our comprehension. We neither understand sin, nor do we understand the offense. How? Really? Have you ever spilled coffee in God the Father's lap? Have you ever accidentally tripped and fallen on him? No, of course not. So how is it that you and I are living offenses before? How is it that he becomes enraged? How is it that he would actually send the sinner to hell? Because that is the situation. And it is in that situation that God the Father sent his Son into the world, not to raise a popular following, not that people would call on his name and go and sing little songs to him. No. It has nothing to do with what purpose Jesus was sent here. Jesus was sent here to remedy an impossible situation, a situation we neither understand nor can remedy. And that is what we euphemistically call sin. And so Jesus, to show his disciples, and by the will of the Father, who decided this transfiguration, decided to give them what is in the Greek called an orama. Orama. This is not simply a vision, but to see with one's eyes, to behold something. And in this sense, the Father showed the disciples something about his Son that was otherworldly, in that he glowed. We don't glow. We're not even shiny unless you really, really polish your teeth. Some people make a habit of using whiteners and shiners, and sometimes your teeth reflect light brilliantly. Well done. But that's not glowing. In the dark, your teeth are just not able to be seen. No light to reflect. Jesus, on the other hand, simply gave off light, an immense amount of light. This is what they saw, this orama. We still use this word in English. We've taken the Greek word orama and turned it into an English word, panorama. So when you have a panoramic view Let's say you're taking a picture and you switch your cell phone over to panoramic view. That's panorama. In other words, seeing seeing all. And so it's a very wide view picture, panorama. Well, they had this orama, this view, this beholding of Jesus glowing like this, but Jesus gave them strict instructions to not speak of it. And that sounds counterproductive, doesn't it? You'd think that this would be something that they could brag about and go, oh, wow, look at Jesus, he glows. No, that was only for their benefit. And really, it wasn't for any real benefit. They didn't understand it. In fact, it made them afraid. They dropped to the ground. It wasn't a good... First off, Peter says, it's good for us to be here, but he doesn't know what he's saying. He says, we'll make a couple little booths. No, they're not staying. They just came to say hi, basically. That was it. And even this orama didn't teach them anything about the gospel, did it? It didn't teach them what the Father was really up to. It only showed them something interesting about Jesus. That's all. You see, faith doesn't come by this sort of thing. Faith comes by words. Faith comes by instruction in God's purpose. And that is that he sent his Son not to glow, but to take on the opposite, the dirty, the filthy, the dull, the mundane, the horrible, the wretched, the dying. Whatever it is about the human condition that enrages God, makes him absolutely furious. Whatever it is about the human condition that God the Father would sentence the humankind to destruction. That is why Jesus came. The opposite of being shiny and glowing and wonderful. That's why Jesus didn't want them to talk about it. He wasn't interested in a following. He wasn't interested in their songs. He wasn't interested in whatever. He was simply there for a job. And that job was to go to the cross and to bring to the Father a human being who lived a perfect life and yet took on the lives of his brothers and sisters of flesh and blood. And to then pay that debt, that price that we owe. We owed perfect love, which Jesus rendered. And yet at the same time, we face a penalty, the wrath of God. And so he rendered that which was demanded when God said, walk with me and be thou perfect. Jesus was and did. At the same time, he stood before his Father, even though he had no sin of his own, he stood before his Father wrapped and clothed in our sin, in our human condition that absolutely enrages his Father. And his Father poured out upon him all of his anger and wrath toward the humans and our whole condition. And all that is about us that enrages him, he poured out on his Son. That's the suffering of the cross. Not what we did to him, not what Satan could do, which is nothing. Instead, it was his Father who abandoned him under his heavy hand of wrath and left him there to die. That is the work of the Christ, the work of the Son of God and the Son of Man. This is his purpose. These 2,000 years later, we sing Transfiguration, Sunday songs, and hymns in church and all that. But the purpose, the message, the reality hasn't changed one bit. Not at all. He came to be one of us. He came to be counted among us, among sinners. He came to face the fate and doom of sinners, and he did. And then he rose from the dead. As he says here that They should not talk about this until after he has ek necron egerethe, from the dead arisen. That's what that means from the Greek, in the Greek text here from Matthew 17, verse 9. Ek necron egerethe, to awaken from the dead. And he did, and so will we, brothers and sisters. That's the consequences of this. So we rejoice, we sing songs, we celebrate, yes. But the reality is to be shared. The reality of being, for anyone who would call themselves godly, is to share godly things with everyone. That's why you can't be godly and be a racist. That's a combination that is not possible to be together. Because how can you hate others, and yet your purpose is to bring good news to others? See, it's incompatible. And so this is the Christian life then. That's why they took him down from the mountain, and then he sent them on their way after they had watched all that he said and did, to tell others. And that's the time now. That's frankly what this sermon is, to tell others. Okay, well, this has been retired Pastor Karl Schmidt, from filling in at Calvary Lutheran Church, little Lutheran church in Amherst, New York, on Air Road, just off of Maple, in northern end of the suburbs, Buffalo, New York. Again, it's a bitter cold morning out there. We've had single digits each morning. I think yesterday it was like 8. And it's just really cold. The snow has a consistency of about styrofoam, and it's really difficult to shovel. But in spite of the plague that's going on, the COVID, in spite of the bitter cold of outside, it's still Transfiguration Sunday. There's still that good news that God the Father sent his Son to do that unique task. Not to come here to simply to glow, but instead to do the opposite. To take upon himself everything that isn't glowing. The sickness, the sin, the wretchedness, the misery, and to bear it in himself, and to be the solution for us all. The forgiveness of sin, resurrection with God from the dead, to be reconciled to God, to be children of God, along with our brother, Jesus. Okay, well, take care, stay well, take all the precautions, and for heaven's sake, get your vaccination. I mean, how simple is that? You just go to the pharmacy and they put the shot in your arm. That's it. It's so simple, but so necessary. Do it for yourself, and do it to protect others. It's if you claim to be godly, it's your obligation. Because in order to care for each other, it can't be words only, can it? It has to be actions too. All right, take care. Bye-bye.